The sacked Foreign Office boss Sir Ollie Robbins is grilled by MPs over the Mandelson vetting scandal.
The handover briefing I was getting as I arrived at post was what I felt was a generally dismissive attitude to his vetting clearance.
The former civil servant says he was under constant pressure from Downing Street to get Peter Mandelson out to Washington. Downing Street denies the claims, but Keir Starmer declined to face MPs again today who are calling on him to quit. And a new scandal emerges, claims that Number 10 wanted a diplomatic role for a second disgraced peer with links to a convicted sex offender. So a turbulent day in Parliament to go over with Nick Ferrari and Caroline Flint, who will be with me for the next hour. It is Tuesday. I'm Matt Barbet, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Evening. He was calm, he was measured, and he was potentially devastating. The sacked Foreign Office boss, Sir Ollie Robbins, rolled a hand grenade into Downing Street today. He didn't quite confirm reports that the Prime Minister's then Chief of Staff told the Foreign Office just approve it, with some additional choice words I can't say right now. But Ollie Robbins did describe almost daily phone calls from Number 10 and a dismissive attitude, he said, towards the vetting of Peter Mandelson over his appointment as our ambassador to Washington. As our political editor Beth Rigby reports now, opposition parties have renewed their calls for the Prime Minister to quit.
Right-hand man to top ministers for over 2 decades. Sir Oliver Robbins, one of Whitehall's most respected mandarins. A Rolls-Royce of the civil service. Now thrown under the bus. Sir Ollie sacked as the head of the Foreign Office by the Prime Minister, and now in front of MPs to give his side of the story over the appointment and vetting of Peter Mandelson, describing a pressure cooker atmosphere in government.
There was an atmosphere of pressure, constant chasing, constant pressure. Has this been delivered yet? Never any interest, as far as I recall, in whether, but only an interest in when. Get this done and get it done before inauguration.
And little interest in even getting the vetting completed.
The handover briefing I was getting as I arrived at post was what I felt was a generally dismissive attitude to his vetting clearance, and a position taken from the Cabinet Office was that there was no need to vet Mandelson.
Challenging the PM's account that Mandelson had failed developed security vetting.
I was told that it was a borderline case and that UKSV were leaning against granting clearance.
A damning account which Downing Street quickly rejected, denying there was a dismissive attitude or pressure applied around the vetting process. But the head of the Union for Civil Servants warns damage has been done. What's the mood in the civil service now like towards this administration?
I mean, it's the Johnson era. You know, it's that kind of sense of feeling that there is no compact, no understanding, no trust between ministers and civil servants. It erodes trust. Come into government, you know, work and be thrown under the bus when it's politically convenient. That's not what this country needs right now.
Not just the civil service incensed. Robbins' testimony handed ammunition to MPs on all sides of the House too.
Peter Mandelson is a man who has proven he's greedy for money, greedy for glamour, greedy for status, greedy for power, and willing to break the rules to get them.
Why did the Prime Minister do this? Why did he appoint Mandelson? Why did he announce the appointment before the national security had been done? And why was he so determined to get Mandelson in post?
Robbins would be a loss to the FCDO and the country, all brought about by a series of catastrophic political decisions by Number 10. That is not right, not fair, and it's not what the public expects of elected officials.
The Labour bench is sparse. The dwindling band of Starmer loyalists laughed off.
There is one thing I would say about this Prime Minister, is that he is absolutely rock solid when it comes to process. You may laugh.
There's always 2 sides to any story, and Ollie Robbins' version of events around Peter Mandelson's appointment has put the Prime Minister under even more fire. Robbins painted a picture of a number 10 that wanted Mandelson in at any cost, and a Prime Minister and his team that didn't much care about the vetting process, despite what Keir Starmer says now. And it leaves the impression that the Prime Minister is scapegoating a civil servant for his own massive error of judgment. It has badly damaged his relations with Whitehall, worsened his already poor standing with Labour MPs, and perhaps most stingingly leaves you at home questioning his leadership and his integrity.
Is this going to bring down your government, sir?
Starmer trying to march on, but the shadow of Mandelson only darkening his prospects as Prime Minister. This scandal still has some way to go. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates is here with me now, himself a Rolls-Royce of political reporting, and we'll show you why in just a second. Before we do, Sam, though, look, people had reservations around the appointment of Peter Mandelson, but the way it's unravelled and getting a Mandarin like Ollie Robbins saying what he said today in front of MPs is almost unimaginable.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking just now about what we've seen today, and on one level, we've had no new Labour MPs come out over the top to criticise Keir Starmer, sort of, who weren't already a usual suspect. There's no great groundswell, there's no rebellion. This is day 4 of a crisis, sort of drowning in processology. I dare any viewer to be able to recite every last bit of the vetting process that's undertaken in this country. So it should be something where we're going, I'm not sure it was that bad, but my goodness. Sort of, it feels today like something significant moved. Not that will affect Keir Starmer in number 10 today, tomorrow, next week, but at some point, I think today exposed the sort of some of the rotting in the foundations of this government. What you had was a Prime Minister being confronted by somebody who, in many ways, is quite similar to him, who is a permanent secretary, which Keir Starmer was once, who is a stickler for the rules, taking apart the argument of the Prime Minister, reframing it and basically showing its shortcomings. Mr. Detail, the man I think a lot of people thought they elected in 2014 as Prime Minister, perhaps a little bit prone to shortcuts and not across the detail. And I think it's the damage that it does to the reputation. And then there's one more thing I think that was deadly today, which is we know from opposition Keir Starmer stood against the kind of cronyism that he objected to on a moral level with Boris Johnson, for instance. But there today was a civil servant of recent and very high standing saying he was trying to get somebody he was trying to sack out of Downing Street into a plum job in an ambassadorial role. There is no denial tonight from Downing Street that that allegation of cronyism at the highest level is true. The cronyism is about the man you are seeing on your television screens now, Matthew Doyle, Lord Doyle, who lost his job as Director of Communications in Downing Street because he wasn't doing it very well, and in the end was sent to the House of Lords rather than an ambassadorial role, of course having the whip removed because of his links with a convicted sex offender. There's that thing again, not worrying too much about who the people you put in positions of power are associated with. But it's the cronyism, I think, that is so problematic in the story today, a new dimension, along with all of the other elements that I think do damage Keir Starmer's standing.
Sam says you're a Rolls-Royce, and that's because we have an eye for detail for your reporting, and it turns out that MPs do as well. Have a look.
Going back to the point where Sir Philip was still permanent Under-Secretary, it is reported by, I think it's Sam Coates, that the Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff, rang Sir Philip and said, in terms stronger than those that I can use before the watershed.
I think you should.
Well, I'll just say that it was just to prove it with terms stronger than that. Does that accord with your impression?
Just prove it.
Does it accord with your impression when you took over from Sir Philip?
I think I recall Philip saying to me, certainly Philip's handover to me has contributed to my strong sense that there was an atmosphere of pressure and a certain dismissiveness about this DV process, which I hope I've tried already to be honest with the committee about. I don't remember Philip using those words. Also, I'm proud to say Philip's probably not the sort of person who'd report them verbatim.
You got name checked there, but then it led to that whole thing with some pretty choice language being quoted.
Gosh, yes, it's always nice to be name checked in a parliamentary setting. But what we reported on Friday was these conversations between the Foreign Office and Number 10. And you heard the way that Ollie Robbins dealt with the question. The whole story of today, of this week, has been of a Downing Street, and not just a Prime Minister, probably more likely his Chief of Staff, desperate to get somebody in. At the point this all happened, Lord Mandelson had been appointed by the King to the role, was doing it, had an office, had some security clearance, and the Prime Minister was happily joking about it. That the idea that you could go back, I think the sense on every level of the communication from Number 10, we just want this done, was absolutely apparent to all.
Yeah. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Joining me now to discuss this further is the veteran Labour left-winger John McDonnell. Good evening to you. Why don't we just cut to the chase? Should Keir Starmer still lead your party and be Prime Minister?
I think in any other circumstances, if there was a viable alternative, I think Keir himself would most probably be standing down. There isn't. We're in the middle of a war, so I think he'll stumble on, and I think that will happen after the May elections as well.
So he's only in post right now because it's just bad timing. Is that what you're saying?
Look, I don't want to be cruel about this, but if there was a viable alternative now, for example, if Andy Burnham was in Parliament now, there'd be people rallying round, explaining to Keir it's better he stands down in the interest of the party, and we'd have an alternative. There isn't an alternative at the moment, so we've got to work with what we've got, and it's Keir Starmer, and we've got to get through this crisis because there's so many other key issues. The Iran war, the implications for the cost of living, we've got to concentrate on those now.
Well, precisely. So really, shouldn't you be rallying around the guy? He says he was let down by process. He's explained himself. Sounds like Ollie Robbins was let down by process as well. The process is wrong, and they're going to change it. Do you really want to have a change of leader now or in the coming weeks and months?
I think what we've got to deal with, the recognition there isn't going to be a change, but we've got to have reform, and we've got to have a dramatic reform within how the party operates and how he operates as well. What we've seen is Number 10 overriding, interfering, pressurising civil servants. We can't go on like this. We can't keep on making these mistakes. And part of the mistakes is because Keir's office controlled everything. Keir wasn't listening to any of us. And at the same time, that's happened too many times. On Mandelson, as soon as his name came into the frame, I said to Keir, and I said it publicly, that if you appoint this person, we'll think you've lost all sense of judgment. Keir never listened, and what happened was Matt Sweeney took control because that was part of the deal when Keir got elected leader of the party. Matt Sweeney would control Number 10, and that's what he did. No leader should allow that to happen again. I hope Keir's learned some lessons, but it's more important now that we look at how we make decisions in this party and how Keir, the leadership, starts listening to people.
You mentioned Morgan McSweeney there, and he is one of those who's been through the Number 10 revolving door. We can show you plenty of others, not cabinet ministers, by the way, who may have been shuffled out. But look, here you go. You can see the people who've either lost their jobs or decided to walk away from them. Ollie Robbins, we know about. Sue Gray, Chief of Staff, much vaunted when they got her and then decided she wasn't right, replaced by Morgan McSweeney. He's effectively fallen on his sword. Chris Wormold, well, we know that the Prime Minister didn't think he was an awful lot of cop. Matthew Doyle, same really, as Sam explained there, didn't do a particularly great job as head of comms. James Lyon, Steph Driver, they've decided not for them anymore. And Tim Allen, well, he left and said he was on the golf course. And that's just 8 of them. There have been others, perhaps in smaller roles as well. I know you think the culture is wrong. How can that be rectified? How can the Prime Minister save the situation?
There has to be more openness, more democratic accountability within the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Which is what he said to the Parliamentary Labour Party only a couple of months ago when this first reared its head.
I think we're in an existential crisis at the moment. So I'm hoping this time around he's learned some lessons from it. That's what this is all about, learning lessons. We can't have one faction of the party dominating overall. We've got to have more open discussion and accountability, and we can't have this chaos.
Because in fairness, people will hear you talk about factions, and they'll think about when you were in the shadow cabinet,
Look,
and that was factional as well.
Factions will always exist. I always cite... Keir cites...
But they're OK if it's your faction.
No. Keir cites Harold Wilson as the Prime Minister he most admires. There were different... Harold Wilson had a cabinet of big beasts, we call them, of all different types, from right the way across the broad church.
Yeah.
And there was rumbustious, but better decisions were made. What we're asking Keir to do is go back to the broad church tradition, where you're involving the whole range of the parliamentary Labour, left, right and centre, so you don't get dominated by one particular faction. In that way, you're more representative, not just of the party, but of the community out there as well. That's the nature of the politics. We'll always have rows, but you hold it together if you've had your say and you're having some influence. It's that style of politics we need to get back to.
Final question. We've got elections coming thick and fast in just over a couple of weeks' time. All the polls suggest it's not going to be a particularly great day for Labour. Do you think he'll survive that, or will that be the moment? And that's the moment people have been talking about for a long time.
They have. I'm on the doorstep quite a bit.
Yeah.
I don't think the votes themselves will be as bad as some of the polls, but they will be bad. They will be tough as well. I think that's another lesson that's got to be learned by Keir about the experience of this recent period. Stop making mistakes. Please don't turn our own people. You know, winter fuel allowance, the cuts to disability benefits, the two-child limit. Why do we make these distractions? I lost the whip on the two-child limit. 12 months later, the party is advocating the policy. So just learn the lessons. And the way to learn lessons is to listen to everyone. Re-establish the broad church, bring people together in that cabinet and listen to all. I was under both, Brown and Blair.
Yeah.
Voted against the party on a huge number of times, but was listened to on quite a lot. But in addition to that, never lost the whip, because they were confident enough about their own politics and their own ideology. That's the sort of leadership that you want. Listen to people rather than just close them down.
John McDonnell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, let's bring in our duo for this evening. Got Nick Ferrari here, the broadcaster, and former Labour Minister Caroline Flink. Caroline, to you first. Do you recognise what John McDonnell's saying there about this leadership somehow forgetting that Labour considers itself a broad church?
I think I do agree with John on one thing, that definitely under Tony Blair and Gordon, there were lots of people who voted against the whip on many occasions. John's already admitted he was one of them, but Jeremy Corbyn was another, and others. And actually, it wasn't imposed about removing the whip. And I think that was about a confidence by Tony Blair and Gordon Brown about their politics and what they stood for.
Yeah.
But also, I would have to say, not that there weren't some issues within those Labour years from 97 to 2010, we had a strong platform and it wasn't disrupted by other things off. The problem for this Labour government, it has actually got some really strong policies and things to say. Whether everybody agrees with them or not, that's another matter. But it's getting pushed to one side because there's just all this noise about... God, Mandelson, if you Google him, how many times has his name been mentioned in the last week, let alone the last 3 months?
Well, maybe they should have Googled him before they appointed him.
maybe. It's distracting from the real body of politics that most of the public are really concerned about.
But let's get back to the scandal, Nick, because, look, it's interesting talking about Blair and Brown, and people remember some of their judgment calls and question them, the Iran war or selling gold reserve, whatever it happens to be. But do you think Keir Starmer, in this case, is just guilty of terrible judgment, and that will do for him at some point?
It will do for him at some point. The question is when. I sense if the Labour Party had someone, and I think John just referred to that, if they had someone that they could all come around, whether it might be Andy Burnham or Wes Streeting or whoever, who was good to go, I think he'd be in more trouble. Currently, I don't think there's the appetite, and I don't think there's the candidate. So Starmer, the survivor, continues. But to your broader point, this has shown a calamitous lack of judgment, quite extraordinary. Now, will it cut through? What I find intriguing with the radio show I present is that if you go back to the Boris Johnson, everybody got Prosecco and birthday cake, right?
Yeah.
Because we've all been to birthday parties where we've had a Prosecco or a glass of wine, but this hasn't yet quite cut through, I would say, to the general
We're
public.
also being told none of us could do that.
Well, that's right.
That was the other thing. The rest of the country couldn't do that. We couldn't have a party.
Right. But this is about DV and UKSV and agreement. I mean, it literally is a different language. Has it cut through as much? No. So he's probably quite fortunate there.
Yeah.
It hasn't cut through. It doesn't have birthday cake. It doesn't have prohibition, as Caroline rightly said. And he's fortunate he doesn't really have a real candidate. So I think he will easily survive beyond the May elections because there's no one to replace him.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, what Ollie Robbins had to say today, I thought it was quite telling when he was asked a hypothetical question about if you had blocked Mandelson's appointment, what would have happened? And he said, well, I don't have to answer it like a civil servant anymore, which would normally be, well, that's hypothetical, I'm not going there. He said it would have been an absolute mess. There would have been huge pressure coming on him. And that in itself tells us a lot, doesn't it, about that tension between the civil service and the elected officials of government.
Absolutely. I mean, it was very interesting listening to Ollie Robbins today and just that whole atmosphere in which they were working, what he inherited from Sir Philip Barton, his predecessor. I still do think, having listened to, I think it was 2.5 hours in front of the Select Committee today...
Well done, you. Well done.
...that he should have flagged. It's not about saying all the details of what was in that briefing. I think he should have flagged. But another interesting...
Hindsight's a wonderful thing.
No, but...
Because the protocol was not to, regardless of who
No,
it
it
was.
wasn't. No, there wasn't. No, I don't think it is as clear as that. Obviously, you're prohibited from going into all the detail, but if you do get flags that say there is a question here, I think he should have done something. That being said, and given we've all got into this, minutiae of the process, which I think is one of the reasons why the public maybe aren't as driven by this as we are, is there's a question here about the fact that Simon Case did write to the Prime Minister and advised that actually the announcement of Peter Mandelson becoming the ambassador, going through the whole process with the King and everything else that then happened, should be stalled until this second stage of vetting had happened. And if you're interested in due process, why on earth didn't they agree to that?
Look,
and because there were all these things going on about getting him to Washington, getting him there before the inauguration and getting the done deal. And one of, I think, the telling things that Ollie Robbins said today, and Number 10 and the Prime Minister are going to have to deal with this in the next few days, certainly tomorrow at PMQs, I imagine, as well, is when he said it wasn't that they weren't really interested in that vetting process at all. It wasn't about whether he would tick the boxes. It was when is it going to get done?
Caroline's absolutely nailed it. Remember, that was November that then Simon, now Lord Case, writes to the Prime Minister, we need to vet, effectively setting up the process. That was the November. The next month, he's announced Mandelson as our judge without any, remember, as we heard in the meeting today, not subject to vetting, the King's approval, not subject to vetting. It's quite extraordinary how they went down that path.
It may not have Prosecco and birthday cake, but a lot of your listeners will be thinking...
Where is it?
Where is it?
A lot of your listeners will be thinking vetting before appointing. Common sense.
Extraordinary.
Oh, I know.
Common sense. We will talk more about that in a moment. You are watching the Politics Hub here on Sky News. Coming up in a moment, we'll hear from a former civil servant on those strained relations between ministers and Whitehall.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
The union that represents senior civil servants warned today that the sacking of Sir Ollie Robbins has had a chilling effect on the civil service. Hannah Keenan previously worked in the civil service and is currently the Associate Director at the Institute for Government and is here with us now in the studio. Hannah, good to see you. Let's just get your point of view on Ollie Robbins and all the minutiae that Caroline and Nick were talking about before we get to life in the civil service, or the blob, as some people want to call it. Do you think he has a convincing argument that he wasn't meant to share the vetting results?
I think there's quite a lot of nuance around that, which I know is quite a difficult, not the most helpful thing to say. I suppose, my headline takeaway from the evidence that Ollie Robbins gave to the Foreign Affairs Committee this morning was that he's been thrown under the bus. And I think there's nuance to that, right? Yeah. I think that he certainly made quite a grave error of judgment in not finding some way to communicate to the Prime Minister, especially after Mandelson's sacking, something about the nuance of that process. And I think, as a result of that error of judgment, you might find that actually you don't have the confidence of the Prime Minister or the Secretary of State to serve in that role. But I think the way that Number 10 have handled this has been really damaging.
They were looking for a scapegoat, you think?
I do think so, yeah.
Nevertheless, do both sides have a case to say it was the process that let us down? And we know now they want to change it. A bit late for Ollie Robbins, of course. But do you think they've both got an argument there?
They do, but that argument is reliant on saying, and both sides have said, well, the process allowed for us to do this, and that obscures, we get lost in the process, I think. And that
the legality is a bit grey, isn't it?
The legality is a bit grey. We don't, but I suppose we get stuck in a lot of the process, and what that obscures are the two kind of quite major areas of judgment here, I think, which is Starmer's judgment in appointing Mandelson, which is getting a bit lost in some of this, and the decision to make that announcement prior to the vetting taking place, which, again, the process allowed for, didn't require it. And then Robbins' error of judgment in not finding some way, and in particular after Mandelson was fired, to kind of make the PM aware of that nuance when he was going around kind of giving assurances to the House.
Let's talk about the relationship between the government, or governments really, and the civil service. You heard what Dave Penman had to say there, boss of the Civil Service Union, the FDA. He was sat behind Ollie Robbins today as he gave evidence to MPs, saying it has a chilling effect on the civil service. Is this chilling effect on chilling effect? Because they're called the blob. We've had successive governments moan about the civil service. We know that, having worked hard to get Sue Gray in as Chief of Staff, that didn't work out. Chris Wormald, that certainly didn't work out. And now Ollie Robbins, that hasn't worked out either. The day after his birthday, happy birthday cake for him and Prosecco, although maybe he was preparing for today's appearance. There's a problem here, isn't there? And it's a chronic one.
I think you're right. The relationship between civil servants and ministers, it waxes and wanes over time. You can expect that to happen, but it's been getting worse and worse. It's been particularly strained since 2016, and it has got worse and worse throughout. And I think we expected, and I think the civil service expected, there might be an improvement in that when Labour came in. There was lots of talk. Starmer came in and said, a personal message to civil servants, I've got your back, I respect you. There were all these town halls and departments, with ministers saying, I want to work together with you. It was 5 months later that we then had those tepid bath of managed decline comments, that kind of jibe from Starmer at the civil service. Worth saying that's the point at, a few weeks after that, Robbins finds a way to appoint Mandelson, or to grant him develop vetting. Aside
from individuals, in fairness, the civil service itself has grown pretty much since, I think, 2020, since the pandemic. A huge amount spent on it, and there has been talk about cutting that spending. That's a fair accusation, isn't it? It's just too many people doing those jobs.
So civil service has grown, I think, about 35% since 2016. That is despite things like immediate headcount caps coming on. Numbers continue to grow. You can look at where that growth is. Lots of it is frontline, kind of operational delivery professions. That's has been more than half of that growth. So it is a nuanced picture, but yes, you're right. I think you've then got to ask, Why is that happening? Part of that is, no one really runs the civil service. You've got, it's quite a dispersed, fragmented set of accountabilities.
Yeah.
Part of it is, absolutely civil service leadership on the civil service side. Some of it is also ministerial leadership and really needing a solid plan. And Labour haven't had that and haven't articulated it clearly.
Caroline, do you recognise some of this stuff? What were your dealings like with the civil service when you were in the job?
Yeah, I mean, it varied from department to department. I think one of the things I always felt and tried to contribute in different roles I had as a parliamentary private secretary to a minister and as minister myself is trying to support civil servants to understand more about what happens in Parliament. I think sometimes there's a disconnect between what's happening departmentally and their role to the minister, who is also usually an MP as well and has to do the Parliament side of it. That's a gap I think is worth developing and training in the civil service. The other side of it as well, I was on the Public Accounts Committee for a couple of years as well after 2015. And there, of course, is a very different vibe to the select committees because we actually have the senior civil servants in front of us, not politicians. And I think there is an issue around holding permanent secretaries and senior staff in the civil service to account for their delivery. Yeah. That being said, the relationship has to be worked at. And I think one of the things is about civil servants knowing you as a minister, as you as a Prime Minister, how you work, what you want to know. And certainly for myself, and maybe it's because, when you have an entourage around you like you do at Number 10, it's a little bit more distant. To my civil service was always to tell me the bad news, don't come at 5 to midnight when there's little I can do about it. I need to know what was working and what isn't working. Let's see how we can resolve it.
Can I put a word of defence in here for Solly Robbins, who I thought was very, very good at me? And I hear exactly what Hannah says, and you're right. And, of course, Karen, you're right. He should have. But this is a man who's absolutely steeped in the process of the civil service. He comes out of Oxford, he goes into the Treasury for 10 years. He then had a decent role under Tony Blair. He then has a more senior role under Gordon Brown. He then has a role under David Cameron. He then has a role under Theresa May as Brexit. And I don't say this in a disparaging way. This man's life is that civil service doctrine. That's all he knows. So, respectfully, it's all right for politicians, it's all right for journalists to say, why didn't you give him the nod? That's not the world in which he's been trained. That's not the world in which he operates.
That's part of the problem.
I agree with, but do you take on board what do you take on board what I'm saying? That's not his world. Sorry, Hannah.
Hannah, last word.
I agree.
I completely agree with you. And I think that the way that Number 10 have handled this has totally closed down any space for a proper conversation about how, what is that civil service world? What is the interaction of the legal advice, of the political pressure that Robbins was under? How has that played out and how can we actually work better together in future? And instead, Number 10 came out very aggressively. They published these kind of documents on Friday night, again on Sunday night. You had Starmer yesterday in the Commons, really, pushing a particular narrative that Robbins has shown actually appears wasn't the case, and that has closed down any space for a productive conversation on that, and it wasn't the only way.
It is going to be interesting to see what he does next, having been in that funnel, as you say, Nick, for pretty much all his working life, although civil servants do get massive pensions, don't they? Let's just leave that one hanging. Hannah, it's really good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. You are watching the Politics Hub. Coming up after the break, we'll get reaction to today's events with the SNP's leader in Westminster.
we're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighbourhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan. I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
Joining us now is the leader of the SNP in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, who called today for a vote of confidence in Keir Starmer. You didn't get your own way, though, did you?
No, I didn't. But look, I think the public have already lost confidence in the Prime Minister, and ultimately he is going to have to go. It's just a question of when. Now, from my perspective, Labour MPs should have done that a few months ago when it was revealed that he'd known that Mandelson had maintained a relationship with Epstein and appointed him irrespective of that very, very important fact, and completely ignoring the victims of Epstein themselves. The Labour MPs at that point chose not to show any courage, chose not to take a moral stand in the way that the public probably would have expected them to do so. I can't see them doing it right now, but post the elections on the 7th of May, I think the Prime Minister is going to be gone.
Can any party get moralistic about this stuff? I mean, you've got your former SNP council leader, Jordan Linden, accused of offences against 7 boys and 5 young men. There's
disgusting, yeah.
There's the funding controversy, which your former chief exec, Peter Murrell, is facing an embezzlement charge for. I think he's back in court next month. It's all murky, and all parties make mistakes, and individuals within them do that too.
It's about accountability, and it's about the judgment of the individuals involved. Now, when it was revealed to me, the case that you've referenced there, I was pretty forthright in my views, in the exact same way as I've been forthright in my views in the House of Commons over very many months.
But you as a leader can't be, and John Swinney can't be expected to know all this stuff, can you?
Well, you can't be expected to know everything, no, but that's the point here. The Prime Minister did know. He was told about Mandelson's connection with Epstein, and he proactively chose to ignore that, just as he chose to ignore the advice of Simon Case, who told him that they should undertake certain acts before Mandelson took post. So the Prime Minister was in an informed position, which is a very different situation.
Well, he says uninformed. He didn't know what was in the vetting. He took Mandelson at his word. That's what they say.
So the Prime Minister's argument in that context is that nobody told him. Indeed, he repeated that ad nauseum yesterday in the Chamber. Nobody told me, I'm the victim here, it's everyone else's fault, they're all to blame. And Diane Abbott stood up and very eloquently said, why didn't you ask? That's your job as Prime Minister, to be curious, to show the same sort of curiosity you would expect from the former Director of Public Prosecutions, but he's not done that, and instead he's sought to blame everyone else. Now, one of the biggest revelations today from my perspective is in relation to Matthew Doyle. I raised the issue of Matthew Doyle with the Prime Minister prior to his appointment into the House of Lords.
Yes, I know.
And the Prime Minister chose to ignore my warnings and those of others and appoint him to the Lords. And it now transpires he wanted him to be an ambassador.
I wanted to ask you, when you heard the name Matthew Doyle mentioned by Ollie Robbins in that grilling today, what did you think? Were you surprised?
What's a surprise? I probably couldn't be surprised because he's a member of the House of Lords, despite what Keir Starmer knew, and many of us in the Commons had alerted him to. But am I ashamed by it? Yeah. Am I disgusted by it? Am I angry about it? Absolutely. And I think the public should be as well. But it's remarkable, isn't it? Because the Prime Minister was asked in the House of Commons yesterday by a Liberal Democrat MP as to whether there had been any other political attempt to put someone into an ambassadorial or diplomatic role as a political appointment. The Prime Minister said he didn't know. It now transpires a day later as Director of Communications was that person.
Matthew Doyle said he didn't know either, didn't know anything about this, didn't want it, wanted to stay in UK politics. He is, albeit without the Labour whip. I mean, that does raise this larger question about these vanity appointments, which, again, all parties try and do.
Well, I don't think we do. I don't put anyone in the House of Lords. We certainly don't have any diplomats yet. That is to come, of course. But there'll be civil service appointments.
Would you make a political? Okay.
As opposed to political appointments. But the Constitution aside, and my flippancy aside, there's an important point here that the Prime Minister had the opportunity in the House of Commons yesterday to be clear that yes, they had looked at other political appointments, and he chose to pretend that he didn't know. This was his Director of Communications. Of course he must have known that they were seeking to get him a diplomatic role. So all of this, quite frankly, stinks. The public are angry. They're really frustrated about the fact that the cost of living is biting, that they can't afford things in the shops, they can't afford to put fuel into their car because it's nearly £2 for a litre of diesel, and Westminster's completely distracted by a problem that the Prime Minister created. Instead of fixing their problems, he's dealing with his own, and he's dealing with it very badly.
Stephen Flynn, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring our panel back in for this evening, Nick Ferrari and Caroline Flint. Nick, this whole murkiness, I mean, is any party immune from this kind of stuff, really?
Well, what makes it so bad was, remember, Sir Keir came to power, and you'll probably remember the words better than I, we were going to have a cleaner or a better politics because the electorate was sick and tired. And that wasn't that, was the word, a change in that. And we can clearly see whether it's trying to possibly influence so Matthew Doyle can get a job, or the whole Mandelson, it is not what he's delivered, and that was his promise. And that's why I think, as Stephen was saying, it will eventually resonate. And the other thing, if we come back, which I find extraordinary, having decided to make that appointment, to the point Stephen just made about Diane Abbott, why wouldn't you sit on top of it? Now, I know I've clashed with Caroline. She thinks there should have been a sort of nod and a wink or whatever.
Oh,
but I would have
terrible.
absolutely stayed on top of it. Mandelson, nothing if not a colourful figure, partly possibly involved in the departure of 2 other Labour Prime Ministers. You would own it, wouldn't you? You would absolutely own it. Extraordinary lack of curiosity.
I mean, these may be the reasons why, between them, Labour and the Conservatives have less than 40% of the polling. Let's have a look at our polar coaster. And you can see, look, things are tightening up, aren't they? You can see Labour really gone downhill, and then obviously others like we know about, the Greens and the Lib Dems are picking up. Conservatives, I guess, fairly steady, and Reform still way out ahead. Look, we've got elections looming. I don't know if this is going to be a picture of the next general election, but certainly, Caroline, on the 7th of May, it's really quite unpredictable, especially if you are those legacy parties, let's call them, of Conservative and Labour.
Yeah, I mean, people are, obviously from Labour and other parties are all out on the doorstep, and they'll be picking up conversations that they're having with people about what's top of their agenda. I think sometimes some of the stuff inside about vetting, that probably goes by the wayside, but I think generally the worry for Labour is people feeling there's bigger issues going on here. Why is this dominating the political debate? And there's no doubt about it. This is going to potentially be tough. I think we lost 2/3 of councillors last year in a much smaller set of elections. And this year, we've got a larger group of councils spread across the country, as well as obviously within the devolved administrations as well. So, yeah, this is the last thing, what is it, just over a fortnight before polling day that Labour needs. It is really, really quite difficult.
Nick, there is a difference, isn't it? You were right to challenge Stephen about issues that are going on allegedly with some of their members, and we could go through a list for the Conservatives, Reform, and even the Greens and Labour, everyone. But I would say the difference here is the size of the Atlantic Ocean, in that Keir Starmer has brought this on himself. He sought to recommend to, arguably, I think, the most senior job there is in the whole of the whole diplomatic office, to be our man or our Mandy in Washington. So he brought it on himself. And now, to keep the illusion, now he tries to be Manuel from 40 Tales. I know nothing. I know it's quite an extraordinary act he's trying to pull off.
Mandy and Manuel. That is
you can have both of those.
Quite the image, Nick. Quite the image. Look, of course, it is the kind of thing MPs are all talking about today, and here's what they told us as they left that debate in the Commons.
What's happened is he's been made to be the fall guy for a decision that was ultimately made by the Prime Minister to appoint somebody with a known relationship with a convicted paedophile who has been thrown out of government multiple times, appoint somebody who's woefully inappropriate to the most important diplomatic post that we have in the UK.
The Prime Minister should have never appointed Peter Mandelson in the first place. In my opinion, it was returning a political favour because of the role that Peter Mandelson, Morgan McSweeney and the organisation Labour Together played in securing the role of Labour leader for Keir Starmer. And he should never have been appointed in the first place. What was in the public domain, what was known, should have ruled Peter Mandelson out.
I think Ollie Robbins today was pretty clear that the message from Downing Street was that you get Mandelson through regardless. I don't think that shows good judgment. And there were additional revelations about Matthew Doyle and Keir Starmer trying to get him a job in FCDO. He was also someone of kind of questionable character in relation to these issues. So no, I think it shows that Starmer showing really poor judgment, and as Ed was saying in the chamber yesterday, when this was Boris Johnson in 2022, Keir Starmer was rightly calling for him to resign, and I don't know why Keir Starmer's not taking the same route.
It was a mistake, and the Prime Minister's apologised for that. The appointment of Peter Mandelson should never have happened, and had the Prime Minister been given all of the information, then he would have made a very, very different decision. He's apologised for that several times, including yesterday.
You know, this comes on top of a number of U-turns and problems. So I do think I would be surprised if he's still there by the end of the year.
There you go. That's a flavour of what MPs think. Someone today said Peter Mandelson had more baggage than Heathrow Airport. I bet the Prime Minister wishes he was lost luggage right now. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up in a moment, can Kemi Badenoch keep the pressure on Keir Starmer? Back at PMQs tomorrow lunchtime.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster that's just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States. It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change.
We've been crushed. Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Well, hello and thank you for watching The Wrap. Every night of the week, we will be joined by the very best commentators to explain the how and the why.
Just cannot stand. Stupid thing to do.
He did know what he was doing. You can expect more analysis.
This is going to get deeper. I think it's going to end up with Russia.
Is war inevitable?
What he's interested in is a deal.
That doesn't rule out strikes.
I disagree.
And laughs along the way. Plus, a look at tomorrow's headlines. The Wrap. Everything wrapped up for you from 10.
Matt Vickers is here, Conservative Deputy Chairman. Matt, look, we talked about the minutiae and the detail and the swearing and all that kind of stuff. How important is PMQ going to be tomorrow for your leader, Kemi Badenoch?
Well, I think she's been holding him to account thus far. The reality is that PMQ has become a little bit ineffective recently because he's getting battered all over, but he refuses to answer questions. People have always said politicians refuse to answer questions. Never has anybody seen something like Keir Starmer at that dispatch box. It is appalling. The Speaker's pulled him up on it previously. It's just whimsical now.
We were discussing before you came in whether this really is cutting through with the electorate. I mean, it'll be the third day straight that this thing has effectively been debated in the House of Commons. Is that a good thing?
I think it, when you consider how seismic this is as an issue in terms of what perceptions people might have of that Prime Minister.
You'd like it to be seismic. I'm not sure everyone in the country really
The Prime
thinks
Minister
the same.
of the United Kingdom appointed a man who'd been sacked twice from government to the most senior, prestigious, important diplomatic position this country has to offer. And it's turned out vetting was questionable, and it's turned out he's a rotter. He's linked to one of the most evil, vile paedophiles ever to walk the earth. And it's been said at that dispatch box. Starmer knew that when he appointed him. It is a disgrace, it is shambolic, it is appalling, and it undermines all trust in politics.
The other thing Ollie Robbins said today was he was asked to find what sounds like a peachy job, head of a mission somewhere around the world for Matthew Doyle, something Matthew Doyle says he didn't know anything about and didn't even want. But it does raise that question about vanity appointments, which the Conservatives have been guilty of.
It raises much bigger questions than vanity appointments.
Yes, but this is the question I'm asking you right now.
This is a pattern of behaviour. Matthew Doyle, also linked to a paedophile, given a seat in the House of Lords. We now hear he's being parachuted, the opportunity being put forward that he should be given some prestigious diplomatic post. This is appalling. This is a pattern of behaviour from the Prime Minister with sod all judgment.
But
let's
talk. There was a vanity appointment. Let's talk vanity appointments. We know when Boris Johnson left, he appointed Charlotte Owen to the Lords with very little experience at the age of 30. Lord Kempsell, also very young.
Sorry, you suggested any of those people had links to paedophiles?
Of course I'm not.
They've been sacked from government several times.
I'm talking about vanity appointments.
Context, come on.
You are messing around here. Of course I'm not. I'm saying these vanity appointments upset people, whatever the reason for them.
I think it upsets people more when they hear what's going on, that this guy's been sacked twice, that he's linked to one of the most vile paedophiles ever to walk the earth. And then we find out that someone else linked to a paedophile has been put in the House of Lords. That tells you all you need to know about this Prime Minister, and it sends an awful message to the victims of sexual abuse out there, and it raises all the question marks around that grooming gang scandal and why it hasn't been dealt with properly yet.
We were showing our audience our polar coaster earlier on. The Conservatives not particularly strong in the polls, but you did tell Trevor Phillips not that long ago that you thought you were going to smash it in the forthcoming elections. There we go, you're on 19%, just 0.3 of a point ahead of Labour. It doesn't really look like you're going to smash it if those numbers are to be believed,
Well, do you know what? With 2 years since the public sent us a message, we're putting our offering forwards. There are candidates out there who will make incredible councillors who are out there knocking on doors. I'll be out with them tomorrow.
Yes.
We're going to fight for every vote because we know what Conservative councils do. They deliver the lowest increases in council tax and they deliver cracking services.
But in Stockton, you charge people to come and talk to you, don't you?
So
£5 a ticket for your coffee morning.
Sky used to be a respected broadcaster that delivered up-to-date, neutral news.
You have the right of reply.
Now I'm going to give you my reply.
Yeah,
the
they're a
reality
tenner,
is
that's what you're
covering. You're covering a Labour puff piece from The Mirror. Nick covered it 2 weeks ago.
Answer the
Nick
question.
covered it 2 weeks ago. So I had a coffee morning in a village hall. Very clear on the invite, this is not a surgery. It had the contact details for anybody who wanted such an appointment.
Yeah.
Made it very clear what it was, made it clear what was happening. But more importantly than that week, the Labour Party...
Did you charge people?
Your lot tried to...
Did you charge people for the coffee morning?
We charged people for a coffee morning to
So
pay
I used
for
to have coffee mornings, having people in with the police on anti-social
Who paid for them? Let me finish my answer and then you can grill me.
So
the reality is... That week, so the Labour, The Mirror, concocted a story, twisted a story, suggesting that people had to pay for access to me. That week, I had a surgery. For anybody who'd raised an issue with me could come and meet me.
Yeah.
I had a community litter pick. The leaflets went through the door, telling them where I was, telling them to come and have a chat. I had a pop-up stall in the high street, and I knocked on hundreds and hundreds of doors across Fairfield, Thornaby, Middleton, St George. That story was created by 2 Labour politicians, one of whom is rarely seen in his constituency. You'd be lucky to catch him there.
Okay.
The other is the Labour leader of my council. She prefers to spend taxpayers' money on food and drink. She's claimed for a Leon, she's claimed for a plate, she's claimed for a steak dinner. That's where we're at. This is a contorted Labour.
This is a very large protest. How much did you make?
We didn't make any money.
You didn't make any money?
And no one turned up. Paid for coffee and cake. I'll go back and see we made 20.
Did people have to have positive vetting before they were allowed?
Well, we had a protest.
Or developed vetting, sorry.
What about the tea drinkers?
It was good coffee, it was good cake, and everybody who came enjoyed it, and it was a sellout. And we didn't charge £50 like the Labour mayor of the North East who's having a Q&A in a couple of weeks' time.
Wow.
You want to hear that from The Mirror?
I'm slightly regretting
I'm
asking that
exhausted
question.
after all that. I need a
beat us into submission. Listen, final question for you, Matt, before we get one last word, if we can, from our panel. Look, looking at those polls, it's very hard to tell how it's going to go anywhere in the country, isn't it?
There's a very, very long way to go, but people know what the Conservatives have to offer. We're putting out our pitch on what we'll do nationally. If they want to see 10,000 more police on the streets, if they want to see business rates disappear for those small businesses on the high street.
You cut the police.
No, we didn't. When we left office, we had the highest number of police on the streets in the UK ever. In the last 18 months, 2 years, the Labour Party have cut those numbers already police stations across central London are closing. There are 1,318 less police on our streets. Labour are soft on crime.
You've had your say, and there was a lot of say about those £5 tickets. Matt Vickers, thank you very much indeed. I mean, that's what's really important here, Caroline, isn't it? Look, all this detail, all this stuff around the civil service and the blob and everything else, it's the vote in a couple of weeks' time that people are going to have their say, whether this matters or not to them.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you know, there'll be a lot of people out on the doorstep pushing those local issues, but there's no doubt about it that sometimes national issues will cut through as well. And we are living at a time, you can see from the poll, what's it called now? The
polar coaster.
That polar coaster, how fractured politics is. You know, the two-party system has been sort of split asunder. Now, you know, we'll have to sort of see what happens. But I think the other thing about all of this is that, you know, whilst, you know, Matt and others might be revelling in what's happening with the governing party. The truth is the public see this and they think often, you know, a curse on all your houses because actually it just makes the body politic look bad.
Sorry to talk over you, Caroline. They feel that often about PMQs, don't they? What does his boss have to do tomorrow to cut through? And what does Keir Starmer have to do to defend himself?
I don't think it will be a three-act play, unfortunately. It was half-time today, and then we saw, obviously, Sir Ollie later. I think Sir Keir now is so practised and so well-rehearsed to using lines such as process. As soon as I found out, I have apologised. I think Kemi has had some decent Prime Minister's questions related with, but I think the defence is just there. I can almost hear what he's going to say to those questions. So she will quite rightly go for him. But I think we've probably seen most of the drama in the preceding days. I don't think there'll be fireworks. He's very good at knocking back that answer.
10 seconds, Caroline.
Yeah, I think, you know, he's just got to come up on the front foot. He admitted he made a massive mistake in the first place, and he just has to be on the front foot and get through it and be strong.
A real pleasure to have you both. I would definitely pay a £5 for either of your coffee mornings, maybe even a tenner. That's it from us. PMQ's here at midday, of course, on Sky News tomorrow. Up next, UK Tonight with Leah Boletto. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.